The detail that stayed with me when I prepared this story was not the airport goodbye, or even the message in which a wife explained why another man deserved her husband's seat. It was the soft mechanical sound of a boarding pass being printed twice, once for the trip that had been planned, and once for the life that had not. You're watching Diary of Owen. Let's go back to the morning that ticket changed its destination. The kitchen tiles were cold enough to sting through my socks. It was 5:42 on a Thursday morning in late October, and I was standing beside the island with one hand around a mug of coffee I had forgotten to drink. The house was silent except for the refrigerator compressor and the soft clicking of the heating pipes inside the wall. On the counter lay 4 dark blue passport covers, arranged in a line. Mine, my wife Elise's, our daughter Nora's, our son Caleb's. Beside them was a cream-colored envelope containing the final itinerary for a 12-day family trip to Belmare, a coastal island country where the houses were built from pale limestone and the sea was supposed to remain warm until November. I had planned the trip for 18 months, not loosely, not in the way people say they are planning something when they have saved 3 restaurants on their phones and mentioned a beach once over dinner. I had planned it the way I planned emergency transportation systems for hospitals. Every connection had a margin, every reservation had a backup, every possible failure had been assigned a response. Our outbound flight was scheduled to leave Darnell International at 10:20 the following morning. We would connect through Vera City, spend 95 minutes in the international terminal, then continue to Belmare. I had booked 2 adjoining rooms at the Marrow Bay House, a small hotel overlooking the western harbor. Elise had chosen it because the balconies had yellow awnings. Nora had chosen the snorkeling excursion. Caleb had found a bakery online that sold almond pastries shaped like shells. I had chosen nothing for myself except the dates. October 25th through November 6th. 12 days in which I would not answer calls from project directors, review evacuation routes, or study patient transfer simulations at 2 in the morning. 12 days with my family. That had been the point. At 5:43, my phone lit up beside the passports. A message from Elise. She was upstairs. I was downstairs. The distance between us was 14 steps and 1 narrow landing, but she had chosen to type. She wrote that we needed to make a change to the trip. I read the sentence twice. Then I looked toward the ceiling, as if I might hear her walking above me. Nothing moved. I typed, "What change?" The response came almost immediately. "Marcus is coming with us." For several seconds, I thought she meant Marcus and his family had booked the same destination. Marcus Hale had worked with Elise for nearly 4 years at Calder and Finch, the commercial property firm where she managed client relations. I had met him at office dinners, charity auctions, and one rain-soaked company picnic where he had spent most of the afternoon teaching Caleb how to throw a spiral football. He was 39, recently divorced, and possessed the kind of confidence that made ordinary remarks sound rehearsed. He remembered birthdays. He noticed haircuts. He could make a room feel as though it had become more interesting simply because he had entered it. I had never disliked him. That would have made what followed easier. I replied, "Is he bringing Theo?" Theo was Marcus's 11-year-old son. Elise wrote back, "No, just Marcus." The heating pipe clicked again. I set my mug down. Why? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then returned. "Because he needs this, and I already told him he could take your place." The kitchen seemed to narrow around me. I read the sentence carefully, the way I would read an incident report after a system failure. I separated the facts from the language. Marcus needed the trip. Elise had invited him. She had offered him my place. The decision had already been made. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. I looked at the 4 passports, then at the envelope, then at the digital clock above the stove. 5:47. I had been awake for 31 minutes. My family trip had stopped including me at some point during those 31 minutes, though I suspected the actual decision had been made much earlier. I typed, "Come downstairs." She answered, "I'm getting ready." I wrote, 5 minutes. At 5:53, Elise entered the kitchen wearing gray running leggings, a white sweater, and the small silver earrings her mother had given her on our 10th anniversary. Her hair was tied loosely behind her head. She looked composed, though she kept rubbing her thumb across the edge of her phone case. She stopped on the opposite side of the island. Neither of us sat down. I asked when she had told Marcus. She said Tuesday. Tuesday had been 2 days earlier. On Tuesday evening, Elise and I had eaten tomato soup at the kitchen table, while Nora worked on a history presentation and Caleb built a suspension bridge from wooden craft sticks. Elise had asked me whether I had confirmed the airport transfer in Belmare. I had said yes. She had nodded and asked whether the driver would have enough room for 4 suitcases. At that point, she had already invited Marcus to take my place. I asked why she had not discussed it with me. She said she had tried. I remembered no such conversation. She reminded me that the previous Friday, after dinner, she had mentioned Marcus was having a difficult time after his divorce. I had said that sounded hard. That, apparently, had been the attempt. I said I did not understand how concern for a co-worker became removing a husband from his own family holiday. She pressed her lips together. Then she said the sentence I would remember more clearly than anything else from that morning. She said, "You would be working half the time anyway." I looked at her. She continued before I could answer. She said I always did this. I planned something beautiful, paid for it, arranged every detail, then carried my work into it like an extra suitcase. She said Marcus knew how to be present. He would swim with the children. He would stay at dinner instead of stepping outside to take calls. He needed a family around him, and the children enjoyed him. The children, not our children. The children. I asked whether Nora and Caleb knew. Elise said they knew Marcus might join us. Might join us. I noticed the wording. I asked whether they knew I would not. She looked toward the passports. That was my answer. The first physical sensation was not pain. It was pressure. A tight band beneath my ribs, as though someone had wrapped a cargo strap around my chest and pulled it 1 notch too far. I breathed in slowly through my nose and counted to 4. In emergency planning, panic is not treated as weakness. It is treated as a predictable reaction to incomplete information. The first response is not movement. It is assessment. I asked whose idea it had been. She said it had happened naturally. Nothing happens naturally when airline tickets, passport details, hotel rooms, and international transfers are involved. I asked whether she had contacted the airline. She said Marcus planned to arrive at the airport early and asked whether the ticket could be transferred. I told her airline tickets were not transferable. She said I had always been good at fixing details. There it was, the assumption beneath the decision. I would be hurt but useful, excluded but cooperative. I would solve the logistical problem of my own replacement because that was what I did. For 17 years, I had converted uncertainty into schedules, backup routes, confirmation numbers, labeled folders, and calm voices. When Nora was born 6 weeks early, I had mapped the fastest route between our house and the neonatal unit at all hours of the day. When Elisa's father suffered a stroke, I coordinated train tickets, hotel rooms, medication lists, and meal deliveries while she sat beside his bed. When our basement flooded, I found temporary housing before the water reached the bottom stair. I had built our family life around the belief that love was partly the removal of preventable chaos. Elise had once told me that being married to me felt like living inside a house with strong foundations. At some point, those foundations had become invisible to her. Or worse, expected. We met when we were 26. I was working as a junior systems analyst for the Harrow Regional Health Authority, though the title made the job sound cleaner than it was. Most days, I stood in loading bays and service corridors with a clipboard, timing how long it took to move equipment, blood samples, and patients through buildings that had been expanded without anyone considering how the new sections connected. Elise worked for a small property consultancy 2 streets away. We first spoke during a power outage at a bakery called Linden Row. The card terminal had stopped working, the lights had gone dark, and 12 customers had begun speaking at once. I was the only person carrying cash. Elise was ahead of me in line. I paid for her coffee and a cinnamon roll. She wrote her number on the back of the receipt because my phone battery was dead. For years, she kept that receipt folded inside a wooden jewelry box. Our marriage was not effortless, but it had been substantial. We had endured fertility appointments, my mother's death, 2 relocations, Elise's father's long rehabilitation, and the 3 years when I traveled almost every week to redesign emergency intake systems for rural hospitals. There had been disappointments. There had also been Sunday breakfasts, handwritten notes, late-night walks, and thousands of ordinary kindnesses too small to catalog. That was what made the kitchen conversation difficult to understand. Betrayal is easier when it arrives wearing a recognizable face, an affair, a lie, a hidden account. What Elise was offering me was more complicated. She had decided another man would be better at occupying my place. Not permanently, she insisted. Just for 12 days. She said the trip had become emotionally important to Marcus. He had not taken a proper holiday since the divorce. He had told her he felt as though he no longer belonged anywhere. I asked when they had discussed this. She said after work. I asked where. She hesitated. The answer was a wine bar near her office called the Green Hour. She said several colleagues had gone. I asked whether several colleagues were still there when the trip was discussed. She said no. I asked how long they had stayed after the others left. She looked down at the counter. 40 minutes. That number was too precise to be invented on the spot. I asked whether anything physical had happened between them. Her head lifted quickly. She said no. I believed her. That may sound naive, but after 17 years, I knew the difference between Elise concealing an act and Elise defending a feeling. Her expression held guilt, but not the kind I was asking about. Something had happened. It simply had not required a hotel room. I asked whether she loved him. She exhaled through her nose and said she did not know what that question meant anymore. I said it meant exactly what it had always meant. She shook her head. She told me I reduced everything to systems and definitions. She said people were not evacuation routes. Feelings did not fit into flowcharts. Marcus listened without trying to solve her. I looked at the trip folder on the counter. The folder contained vaccination records, emergency contacts, printed reservations, insurance documents, and a list of local clinics because Caleb had a severe allergy to cashews. I asked whether Marcus knew how to use Caleb's injector. She said that was not fair. I asked whether he knew Nora sometimes became disoriented in crowded transit stations and needed someone to walk on her left side. She said I was deliberately missing the point. I told her I understood the point. She wanted to experience the family trip with someone who made her feel more alive. Her eyes filled then, though she did not cry. She said, I want to know what it feels like when everything isn't managed. I considered that. Then I said, I see. It was the only sentence I trusted myself to speak. At 6:18, Caleb's alarm sounded upstairs. The noise was faint but familiar, a sequence of rising electronic notes he had chosen because he claimed normal alarms felt hostile. Elise glanced toward the hallway. I gathered the passports. She asked what I was doing. I said I was putting them away before the children came down. She told me we still needed to discuss the ticket. I said we had. She asked whether I would call the airline. I said yes. Relief moved across her face so quickly that I almost looked away. She thought I had agreed. Perhaps part of her believed I would drive them to the airport too. The next hour unfolded with terrible normality. Caleb came downstairs in mismatched socks and ate 2 bowls of cereal. Nora complained that the bathroom mirror was fogged because Elise had showered too long. I packed lunches. Elise reminded Caleb to bring home his science workbook. At 7:36, the children left for school. Neither of them mentioned Marcus. I watched through the front window as they crossed the road together. Nora was 14, tall for her age, with Elise's dark hair and my habit of checking both directions twice. Caleb was 10, and walked as if every destination were less interesting than whatever he could find along the way. When they disappeared around the corner, I turned from the window. Elise was standing behind me. She said she knew this was painful. I asked whether she did. She said the trip did not have to mean anything final. I told her, replacing me on a family holiday was already something final. We simply did not know yet what it had ended. She folded her arms. She said I was making the decision more dramatic than it was. I looked at the clock. 7:41. I remember thinking that my marriage had changed shape between the school bell and the morning traffic. I said, "You chose him." She said she chose the version of the trip that might actually feel like a family trip. There was no anger in her voice. That made it worse. She believed she was telling the truth. I went upstairs and dressed for work. At 8:12, I left the house carrying my laptop bag and the cream itinerary envelope. I did not kiss her goodbye. I did not slam the door. The latch closed with the same small click it made every morning. The Harrow Regional Operations Center occupied the 6th floor of a concrete building beside the river. My office window faced an elevated railway and a row of warehouses with silver roofs. At 9:03, I joined a planning meeting about the expansion of St. Aldwyn Medical Campus. The project involved 3 existing hospital buildings, a new trauma unit, and a proposed underground corridor designed to move patients between them during severe weather. For 90 minutes, I listened to architects argue about turning radii for transport beds. I took notes. I asked questions. I approved a revised simulation schedule. At 10:47, I returned to my office and closed the door. Then I opened the airline website. Elise had been correct about one thing. The ticket could not be transferred. It could, however, be changed. I entered my booking reference and surname. My itinerary appeared on the screen. Darnell to Vera City. Vera City to Belmare. Returning 12 days later. The total fare had been expensive because I had booked flexible premium economy seats. I had chosen flexibility in case one of the children became ill. The change fee was modest. The fare difference depended on destination. I opened a second browser window. For the previous 6 months, I had been speaking with a healthcare infrastructure consultancy named Northline Resilience. They were based in Kestrel Bay, a northern coastal city nearly 4,000 miles from our home. Northline had approached me after a conference presentation I gave on hospital continuity planning. Their managing director, Priya Soren, had asked whether I would consider leading a new division focused on climate-related evacuation systems. I told her no. Then she asked again 3 months later. I told her the timing was wrong. She emailed a third time in September with a formal offer. The salary was 28% higher than my current compensation. The position included relocation support, temporary housing, and the authority to build my own team. I had not told Elise about the final offer. Not because I intended to hide it permanently, because I intended to reject it. The job would have required moving our family, uprooting the children, and asking Elise to rebuild her career in a new city. I had drafted the rejection email twice, but never sent it. A small part of me had wanted to keep the door open until after Belmare. I imagined 12 days away might restore whatever distance had grown between Elise and me. I imagined sitting beside her on a yellow awning balcony, listening until I understood what had gone quiet between us. I had not known she was planning to give the balcony seat to Marcus. At 10:58, I searched flights from Vera City to Kestrel Bay. There was one departing at 7:40 on Friday evening. The Belmare flight departed at 2:15. Same terminal, different gate. The ticket change would cost $416. I sat back in my chair. On my desk was a scale model of a hospital corridor, a gift from my team after we completed a project in East Halden. The miniature corridor divided into 2 routes around a central obstruction. In emergency systems, a decision point is the last place at which a person can safely change direction. After that point, momentum and infrastructure determine the outcome. Airports contain hundreds of decision points: doors, escalators, security lanes, departure gates. One sign directs you toward one life. Another sign directs you toward somewhere else. At 11:06, I called the airline. The representative's name was Davina. I told her I wanted to change only my portion of a family booking. She confirmed that the other 3 passengers would remain on the original itinerary. I asked whether my first segment could remain the same. She said yes. I could fly with them to Vera City, then separate for the second leg. I almost declined. The thought of sitting beside Elise for the first flight felt unbearable. Then I considered the children. They believed I was going to Belmare. They deserved more than discovering my absence at the departure gate. I asked Davina to make the change. She read the new itinerary aloud. Darnell to Vera City to Kestrel Bay. Return date left open with a fare credit. I gave her my card number. At 11:19, the confirmation arrived. I printed the boarding documents using the small printer beside my filing cabinet. The machine warmed, clicked, and pulled in one sheet of paper, then another. The first page showed the original family segment. The second showed my new destination, Kestrel Bay. I held both sheets for a moment. The paper was still warm. At 11:27, I called Priya Soren. She answered on the fourth ring. I asked whether the position was still available. There was a pause. Then she said they had not offered it to anyone else. I told her I could be in Kestrel Bay on Friday night. She asked whether I was coming to negotiate. I said I was coming to begin. Priya did not ask what had changed. That restraint was one of the reasons I had respected her from the first conversation. She said she would arrange a car and send the temporary housing information. I asked whether she needed a signed contract before I boarded. She said yes. At 12:06, I signed electronically. At 12:11, I became Northline Resilience's incoming Director of Clinical Continuity. At 12:14, I removed the unsigned rejection email from my drafts. I spent the afternoon doing what I had always done when the world became unstable. I made lists, not emotional lists, practical ones, documents to take, accounts to separate, work obligations to transfer, medication details for Caleb, school contacts, mortgage records, insurance policies. I did not intend to disappear from my children's lives. I intended to stop standing in a position from which I could be casually replaced. At 3:22, I called my attorney, Miriam Voss. Miriam had prepared our wills 8 years earlier. She was direct, calm, and uninterested in revenge. I explained what had happened. She asked whether I believed Elise and Marcus were having a physical affair. I said I did not know. She asked whether I intended to end the marriage. I said I intended to accept a job in Kestrel Bay and establish temporary residence there. I needed to understand how to do that without abandoning parental responsibilities or creating unnecessary damage. She told me not to empty accounts, conceal assets, or make unilateral decisions about the children. I said I would not. She advised me to document the travel arrangements, preserve messages, and speak to Elise before departure. I said I would. Before we ended the call, Miriam said something that settled me. She said, "Leaving a room is not the same as burning it down." At 4:08, Priya sent the housing details. A furnished apartment on Seabrook Avenue, 6th floor, 1 bedroom, 31 days initially, extendable if necessary. The apartment overlooked a ship channel and stood 12 minutes from Northline's office. There was a photograph of a narrow balcony with 2 metal chairs. No yellow awning. I saved the address. At 5:35, I drove home. Elise's car was already in the driveway. Through the front windows, I could see the dining room light and the faint movement of someone near the kitchen. For a moment, I remained behind the wheel. The house had been ours for 9 years. We had painted the front door red because Nora, then 5, believed every family should live behind a recognizable color. I had replaced the roof. Elise had designed the garden. Caleb had chipped the lower stair railing with a toy truck when he was 3. There are places that become valuable not because they are beautiful, but because your life has worn grooves into them. I entered through the side door. Marcus was standing in my kitchen. He wore a navy coat and held a bottle of wine by the neck. Elise stood beside the stove. The children were upstairs. No one spoke for several seconds. Then, Marcus said he had come by to discuss the ticket issue. I placed my laptop bag on a chair. I asked whether he had packed. His eyes shifted toward Elise. He said mostly. I asked whether he had arranged his own travel insurance. He said not yet. I nodded. Elise watched me carefully. She asked whether I had spoken to the airline. I said yes. Marcus stepped forward slightly. He said he understood the ticket might not be transferable, and he was willing to pay whatever difference was required. I told him there would be no difference. He relaxed. I continued. I said he would need to purchase his own ticket because mine was no longer going to Belmare. The room became still. Elise asked what that meant. I told her I had changed my connection in Vera City. Marcus lowered the wine bottle. Elise asked where I was going. I said Kestrel Bay. She looked at me as though I had named a city from a childhood story. She knew about Northline's earlier interest. I had mentioned the initial approach months before, when I still believed it was too impractical to consider. She asked whether this was for work. I said yes. She asked for how long. I said I had accepted the position. Marcus looked toward the hallway. He seemed suddenly aware that he was standing inside the private collapse of someone else's marriage. He said he should leave. Elise told him to stay. I said he should probably go home and book his flight. Marcus looked at me. His face held embarrassment, concern, and something close to shame. Not triumph. That mattered. He said he had not understood that I had been removed from the trip. Elise turned toward him. She said she had explained that I could not come. Marcus said she had told him work had become too complicated, and I had agreed he could use the booking. I looked at Elise. Her face changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. The betrayal gained a second structure. She had not only chosen him, she had made my absence sound voluntary. Marcus placed the wine bottle on the counter. He said he was sorry. I believed him too. I told him the ticket had never been transferable, and the hotel reservation remained in Elise's name. If he still wanted to go, he should make arrangements before prices increased. He nodded once. Then he left through the side door. The bottle remained on the counter between us. At 5:49, the door closed. Elise asked whether I had deliberately humiliated her. I said I had not invited him into our kitchen. She said I could have warned her. I asked whether she had warned me before offering him my place. She looked away. I felt no satisfaction. That is important. There was no victory in seeing her cornered by her own explanation. Only a deeper sadness, because until that moment, some part of me had still believed she had been honest with everyone except herself. I opened the refrigerator and took out a bottle of water. My hands were steady. She asked whether I was seriously moving across the country because of one trip. I said the trip had not caused the problem. It had revealed the routing. She gave a bitter laugh and said I was doing it again, turning our marriage into infrastructure. I told her infrastructure was what remained after people stopped believing intentions were enough. She sat at the table. The anger left her face. She asked when I had accepted the job. I said that afternoon. She asked when I had planned to tell her about the offer. I said I had planned to reject it after Belmare. She closed her eyes. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she said I had hidden something important too. I said yes. That surprised her. She opened her eyes. I told her I had kept the offer private because I did not want to burden the family with a possibility I expected to refuse. It had been a mistake, but I had not offered her place in our family to someone else while I decided. She said Marcus was not replacing me. I looked toward the staircase. I asked whose seat he was taking on the plane. She did not answer. I asked whose chair he would use at dinner. She said that was unfair. I asked whose room he would enter through the adjoining door at the hotel. Her expression tightened. The booking contained 2 rooms. 1 room for the children, 1 room for Elise and me. She said she had planned to ask the hotel for a rollaway bed. I nodded. She asked whether I believed her. I said yes. Again, I did. Physical fidelity was no longer the central question. She had moved the boundaries of our family far enough to place another man inside them. Whether he slept near the window or beside her did not repair that. Nora came downstairs at 6:07. She stopped halfway into the kitchen and looked from Elise to me. She asked why Marcus's wine was on the counter. Elise said he had stopped by. Nora looked at me. Children notice structure long before adults admit it has changed. She asked whether something was wrong with the trip. I pulled out a chair. I told her there had been a change. Caleb came down while I was explaining. I kept it simple. I said I had accepted a new job in Kestrel Bay and would be traveling there from Vera City. Their trip with Elise was still happening if they wanted to go. Nora asked whether Marcus was going. I said he might. She looked at her mother. Then she asked, "Instead of you?" Elise said it was complicated. Nora said it did not sound complicated. Her voice was flat. I told her not to turn the conversation into a trial. She asked whether I was leaving because of Marcus. I said I was leaving because an opportunity I had repeatedly declined no longer seemed impossible. That answer was accurate, but incomplete. Caleb's eyes filled. He asked whether I would come back. I moved my chair closer to him. I said I would always come back for him and Nora. I explained that Kestrel Bay was a job, not an erasure. We would speak every day. I would return for school events and weekends as often as the schedule allowed. Nothing about my being their father was changing. He asked whether we would still go to the airport together. I said yes. Elise looked up sharply. I told them our first flight was unchanged. We would travel together to Vera City. After that, we would board different planes. Caleb seemed to accept this because airports made sense to him. Different planes could still leave from the same building. Nora did not accept it. She asked whether she had to go to Belmare. Elise said the trip was already paid for. Nora said that was not what she had asked. I told her she did not have to decide at the kitchen table. At 7:18, Caleb went upstairs to finish packing. Nora followed him. Elise and I remained at the table. She whispered that I had turned the children against her. I said I had answered their questions. She said I had made myself look calm and reasonable, while leaving her to explain the rest. I said there was no version of the truth in which her decision became my behavior. Her face folded then, not theatrically. Her shoulders lowered, and she covered her eyes with one hand. She said, "I didn't think you would actually go." That sentence contained the entire marriage as she had come to understand it. She had believed my steadiness was immobility. She believed because I had absorbed every disruption before, I would absorb this one too. I asked what she thought I would do. She said she thought I would be angry. She thought we would fight. She thought I might refuse to help with the booking. Then, eventually, I would understand why she needed the trip to feel different. I asked whether there had been any place in that imagined sequence for me to say no. She lowered her hand. She did not answer. I went upstairs to pack. The suitcase I had prepared for Belmare was open on the bedroom bench. Inside were linen shirts, swim shorts, sandals, sunscreen, and a paperback novel I had been saving for the flight. I removed everything. Then I repacked for Kestrel Bay. Wool trousers, 3 work shirts, a dark suit, waterproof shoes, a heavier coat. The weather forecast showed rain and temperatures near 48 degrees. Elise stood in the doorway while I folded clothes. She asked whether I would sleep in the guest room. I said yes. She asked whether we could speak after the children went to bed. I said we already had. She said 17 years deserved more than one morning and a changed flight. I stopped folding. She was right. 17 years did deserve more. The difficulty was that she had spent part of those 17 years constructing the morning we were now standing inside. I told her we could talk after the trip. She asked whether there would still be a marriage after the trip. I said I did not know. It was the truth. At 9:26, I carried my suitcase into the guest room. On the desk lay a framed photograph taken during our 10th anniversary weekend. Elise and I were standing on a wooden footbridge in the rain. She was laughing because the umbrella had turned inside out. I placed the photograph face down. Then I reconsidered and turned it upright again. I did not want to rewrite the past simply because the future had changed. The next morning, we left the house at 6:32. Marcus had booked his own ticket on the same route. He planned to meet Elise and the children at the airport. The drive to Darnell International took 47 minutes. Rain moved across the windshield in thin silver lines. Nora wore headphones, but no music was playing. Caleb held his passport in both hands. Elise sat beside me. We spoke only about parking and luggage. At 7:24, I pulled into the departure garage. Marcus was waiting near the elevator with a gray suitcase. He looked as though he had slept badly. He approached carefully. I unloaded the luggage. He offered to take Elise's large case. She let him. That small exchange hurt more than I expected. Not because he carried it, because she had stopped asking me. At the check-in counter, the agent printed 5 boarding passes, 4 to Belmare, 1 to Kestrel Bay after the shared connection. Marcus had purchased a seat several rows behind Elise and the children for the first flight. On the second flight, he was seated beside her. I learned that when Caleb asked whether everyone was sitting together, Elise answered too quickly. At 8:09 we passed security. At 8:34 we sat near gate 22. The departure hall smelled of coffee and wet coats. Travelers moved around us with the subdued impatience of early morning. Nora sat beside me. She asked what Kestrel Bay looked like. I showed her the photograph Priya had sent of the apartment balcony. Nora studied it. She said the water looked gray. I said it probably was. She asked whether I wanted to live there. I told her I wanted to find out who I was in a place where no one had already decided my role. She leaned her head against my shoulder. At 9:46, boarding began. Elise approached while Marcus took Caleb to buy water. She asked whether I still had time to reverse the change. I said yes. Technically, I did. My fare allowed same-day modifications until departure. She said we could forget Marcus and all go to Belmare as originally planned. I looked toward the shop where he stood beside our son. I asked what forgetting Marcus would mean when we returned. She said we could work on things. I asked whether she wanted me on the trip, or whether she was frightened by the fact that I had somewhere else to go. Her eyes moved away from mine. That was enough. I told her I would not take a seat simply because she had become afraid of it being empty. The gate agent called our boarding group. On the plane, I sat beside Caleb. Nora sat across the aisle. Elise sat one row ahead. Marcus was farther back. During takeoff, Caleb gripped my wrist the way he had since his first flight at age 6. At 10:38, the aircraft rose above the cloud layer. Sunlight filled the cabin. For 2 hours and 40 minutes, we existed as a family traveling toward a shared connection. Caleb watched a film. Nora slept. Elise stared out the window. I reviewed Northline's current projects on my laptop. One involved a small coastal hospital threatened by seasonal flooding. Their evacuation plans assumed the only highway would remain open. It would not. The maps made that clear. The hospital needed an alternate route before the storm arrived, not after the road disappeared. At 1:52 local time, we landed in Veira City. Our next flights departed from opposite ends of the international terminal. Belmare from gate C14. Kestrel Bay from gate F6. The signs divided just beyond passport control. We had 3 hours and 48 minutes before my flight. Their flight departed in 1 hour and 52 minutes. We walked together until the central concourse. At 2:21, we reached the overhead sign. Gates C1 through C30 pointed left. Gates F1 through F18 pointed right. Travelers flowed around us. This was the decision point. Marcus stood a few feet away, holding his own suitcase and Elise's. Nora hugged me first. She held on longer than usual. I told her I would call when she landed. She whispered that she did not want to go. I told her she could still choose. She looked at Elise, then at Caleb. She said she would stay with her brother. I understood. Caleb wrapped both arms around my waist. I crouched so we were eye level. He asked when he would see me. I told him the second weekend in November. I had already checked flights. He made me promise. I did. Then I stood. Elise faced me. For a moment, she seemed unsure whether to hug me. We had slept beside each other for more than 6,000 nights. Now we stood 2 feet apart beneath an airport sign. She said, "You really used the ticket to leave." I told her, "You told me someone else needed my place." Her face tightened. I continued. So I found a place that needed me. There was no triumph in the words, only completion. She asked whether this was goodbye. I said it was the point where our routes separated. What happened after that would depend on whether either of us was willing to tell the truth about how we arrived there. She nodded slowly. Then she hugged me. I allowed it. Her cheek was cold. She said she was sorry. I believed she was. But apologies given at departure gates cannot decide which plane a person boards. The announcement for Belmare sounded overhead. Marcus stepped closer to the children. He did not touch Elise. He told me he would make sure they arrived safely. I said, "Thank you." That was all. They turned left. I watched until the crowd absorbed them. Caleb looked back twice. Nora looked back once. Elise did not turn. I stood beneath the sign for another minute. Then I turned right. Gate F6 was a 14-minute walk. I moved through a corridor lined with tall windows. Outside, service vehicles crossed the wet concrete beneath a darkening sky. At 3:02, I received a message from Elise. She said there was still time. Their plane had not boarded. I looked at the departure screen. Belmare, on time. Kestrel Bay, on time. I typed that I knew. Then I put my phone in my pocket. I bought a bowl of soup at a quiet restaurant near my gate. The soup was too salty, but I finished it. At 4:11, Priya called. She said the driver would meet me near baggage claim, holding a Northline folder. She told me the apartment refrigerator had been stocked with basic groceries. I thanked her. She asked whether I needed anything else. I looked around the terminal. I said, "Not tonight." At 5:36, a photograph arrived from Caleb. It showed the wing of their airplane and a strip of orange sunset. Underneath, he had written that they were taking off. I sent him a photograph of my gate. I told him I was next. At 7:02, boarding began for Kestrel Bay. I handed my passport and boarding pass to the gate agent. The scanner emitted a soft electronic chime. For an instant, I thought about the original booking, the yellow awnings, the warm water, the shell-shaped pastries, the balcony where I had imagined repairing my marriage. Then the gate agent returned my passport and told me to have a pleasant flight. I walked down the jet bridge. My seat was 8A. Beside me sat an elderly man who removed his shoes before takeoff and apologized for snoring. I told him it would not bother me. At 7:48, the plane left the ground. Below us, Veera City became a grid of white and amber lights. I watched until the coastline disappeared. The flight lasted 5 hours and 19 minutes. I did not sleep. I read project files. I wrote an outline for my first 90 days at Northline. I listed the hospitals I wanted to visit and the specialists I hoped to recruit. At 10:56 Kestrel time, the captain announced our descent. Rain covered the window. The city appeared gradually beneath the clouds, built around black water, long bridges, and rows of lights climbing the hills. We landed at 11:17. A driver named Ren was waiting near baggage claim with a blue Northline folder pressed against his chest. He took my suitcase and led me to a dark sedan. The drive to Seabrook Avenue took 26 minutes. Kestrel Bay was colder than I expected. Rain shone on the streets. Cargo cranes stood along the harbor like narrow metal animals. Small restaurants remained open despite the hour, their windows bright against the wet sidewalks. At 11:58, Ren stopped outside a gray apartment building. He gave me an envelope containing 2 keys and a temporary access card. The apartment was exactly as photographed. 1 bedroom, a narrow kitchen, a small table, 2 metal chairs on the balcony. Someone had placed a bowl of green apples on the counter. I set my suitcase beside the sofa. For the first time in 17 years, I stood in a home where none of the objects carried a shared memory. The silence was immense. I opened the balcony door. Cold air entered the room. Below me, a cargo ship moved slowly through the channel, its lights reflected in the black water. My phone showed 12 unread messages. 3 from Elise, 4 from Nora, 2 from Caleb, 1 from Priya, 2 from numbers I did not recognize. I called the children first. It was morning in Belmare. Caleb answered from the hotel balcony. Behind him, the sea was bright blue. Nora appeared beside him holding half an almond pastry. They told me about the hotel, the flight, and the driver who had taken the wrong road. Neither mentioned Marcus. I told them about the rain. I showed them the harbor. Caleb said the ships looked enormous. Nora asked whether I was okay. I looked around the unfamiliar apartment. I said I was tired, but yes. After the call, I read Elise's messages. The first said they had arrived. The second said Marcus had booked a separate room after the hotel refused to add a rollaway bed to hers. The third said she understood why I had gone. I did not answer immediately. At 12:31, I unpacked my shirts. I placed my toothbrush in the bathroom. I hung my coat beside the door. Then I returned to the balcony. The rain had become lighter. Across the channel, a row of warehouse lights switched off one by one. I thought about the word beginning. People often imagine a beginning as something bright. A first sunrise, a clean room, an open road. Mine began after midnight, in a wet northern city, with 1 suitcase, a temporary key, and a return ticket that had never been booked. I sent Elise a message. I said I was safe, nothing more. Then I placed the phone on the metal table. The screen went dark. Far below, The cargo ship sounded its horn, once as it passed beneath the bridge. I sat in the colder of the two chairs and watched it continue toward open water, carrying everything it had chosen to keep, leaving no wake that the rain could not eventually smooth away.